For step 14, here's the underlap we just did. We're going to keep it like this. Bring this downward all the way, I think. Like so. Pin it. We're going to stitch half of an inch away, all the way up, all the way down here. And then on this side, we will do the same thing. And it should fit exactly with the neck edge here. Fold it down. It's like perfect fit. Gonna add another one. Making sure that this is also out. I'm gonna pin it here so it could be exactly where, exactly on the edge. Here. We're gonna stitch. I believe we stitch half of 5/8 of an inch to keep it consistent.
To finish this step, you're going to trim your corners.
Way too close right here. Step 15, turn the neckband to inside along fold line, having neck edges even. Alright, so I'm gonna trip. Where's my pointer? It's right here. Bam. Looks good. Now we
After turning my neckband, I'm pressing this and I'm also pressing along the zipper for a cleaner finish.
to finish 15, gonna pin this neck piece to this neck piece, but on the outside. So like this, and it'll hold it in place. Can you guys just snap? That's because I wrote too big.
In this clip, I'm showing you how ironing this part of the garment gives it a nicer finish along the zipper. Right now, we just ironed it because on step 17, we're going to be stitching very close to the zipper here. So I'm showing you again how the ironing in step 15 kind of made it a nicer finish on both sides. For step 16, we're going to be pressing up the hem, and here I'm kind of seeing, I think, where the edge lies. And in these clips, I'm doing a fold, like a double fold, but as you will see in a few clips from now, that it made it very wonky. So I ended up fixing that, I think, off camera, and I ended up just doing one fold over, kind of like right here what I'm doing, just one fold over instead of folding it twice. Does that make sense? So in this clip, I'm showing you how it came out really bad because I folded it twice, and you're only supposed to fold it once.
Okay, step 17, we are now going to top stitch on the zipper.
When you top stitch near the zipper here, you have to give the zipper enough space to pull through. So in this clip, I might be stitching really close to the edge to give it a really nice, quote unquote, nice finish. See? But after stitching it this way, it did not give me enough space, so I had to stitch it again a bit further away from the edge so that way the actual zipper, had enough space to pull through. Since I'm doing view C, I will now be showing you my attempt to stitch my sleeves the same as view B. So the following clip is gonna be steps 29 on page 4 of the pattern instructions. However, for the instructions for the sleeves on B, they asked you to use a ribbing, and I did not use a ribbing because it seemed that for view C you could have used just normal fabric, the same one as the sleeve and the coat. So if you did not use a ribbing, or you're not using a ribbing, then this might not work for you, just how it didn't work for me because my fabric did not stretch enough for this part. I still included it in this clip to show you an example if you are maybe using ribbing for this view, so it will work for you, or if your fabric does stretch out enough. So for step 29, you have to stitch piece number 10. You are going to put it right sides together, matching notches and edges, and you're going to stitch at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So after stitching this piece, it's not mentioned to open your seams in the middle, but looking at the picture and just again keeping it consistent with all the other steps, I am folding what is this? I'm pressing my seams open in the middle. Repeating the same process for step 30, you're going to stitch piece 11, which is the sleeve band, um, with right sides together, matching notches and edges at 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then after that, you're going to press the middle seam open and then fold the whole piece with wrong sides together in half. So for step 31, you have to pin your band to the lower edge of your sleeve. So you're going to have your sleeve on the inside and your band on the outside, right sides together, raw edges even. Here in this clip you will see that also you have to keep it folded off, but you'll see in this clip that my fabric is not stretchy enough to do this part, even though I did cut out my piece the right way and there is some stretch to it. It's not enough stretchy for the sleeve to fit. If you are following this and doing B, the coat for B, you will most likely be using your tubular or a rib knit. It will be stretchy enough for your sleeve, so do the same process if you have this. But even on the back of the pattern, it did not say you needed a fabric like a rib knit or a tubular. It just said here you just need a sleeve band, but it did not say it had to necessarily be stretchy. And at the very top where it tells you what type of fabric to use, it did not include you needed a rib knit for the sleeve on the C. So I'm not too sure what happened here with this pattern when it was printed. However, I'm going to give you some tips if you need them if you really want to have a sleeve done on yours and your fabric is like mine. I'm going to show you how you could probably make this work. Okay, so if you want to have a sleeve with a little band on here, I'm going to grab the sleeve and the part where the band is supposed to go over, you're going to baste a stitch on that part. It does not have to be half of an inch away from your seam, but just baste from a little bit after the sewn part on both sides. Does that make sense? So here I'm basting and I started a little bit away from the sewn edge and I'm also ending it away from sewn edge, and you're going to want to have a good amount of thread laying over, and then on the side that you stitched that was the bobbin side, you're going to pull gently on it to gather the sleeve just a little bit. So when you think you've gathered enough, you grab your sleeve band and you're going to put it over your sleeve and move the stitching around to make sure that it fits it and lays as flat as possible while being gathered. So here I'm undoing the sleeve band, but it's not necessary. And instead of having the band over the sleeve, I put the sleeve over the band so that way you could move your basted stitch. If it's too gathered, you could loosen it up a bit and you are able to see that better this way. But now I'm going to pin it down at the raw edges, similar to how you were supposed to pin it down if you had the pin, right sides together as well. And after you pin it down, you're going to sew at with half of an inch seam allowance. And here I'm checking the band to make sure it's going the right direction. So if my dog were to wear it, the band has to go so that the foxes are the other way. Here I'm changing it again because the foxes were going to be upside down. So if you have a nap on your fabric, make sure you double check that before you sew it on. If you do have a ribbing or a fabric that is stretchy enough, what you do is you pin the band like you had it before and you stitch a half of inch away from the raw edge, and then you go over it again a quarter inch away from the stitch you just made. So if you put it on your machine, you're going to have one stitch that's half of an inch away from the raw edge, and then another stitching that is 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. And then once you trim those, if you are using a ribbon, this is still step 31, you're going to trim very close to your stitches. For continuing to step 32, you're going to be pressing the seam toward the sleeve, pressing the band out. So if your dog were wearing it, the seam where you stitch the band has to be pointing upwards. And then if you're like me, here I am adjusting the sleeve still. I was tugging on it. I think I might have made it too loose. So, and it's gonna have some, I refer to them as darts because you're gathering your little sleeve together. So here I'm showing you that now we did it so that the band or that the sleeve is the size of the band now. Now you're gonna sew half of an inch away from the raw edge here. It's a little tricky because the piece is very small, so just try your best here. What I did was, guess my advice would be don't use really big pins like I did here because they did get caught a little bit and I had to just move it and wiggle it around a good amount. So stitch it half of an inch away from the raw edge and make sure that since it's a circle, you move the fabric like once it's stitched, move it just so that way you can stretch it out again and complete your circle. So here I'm showing you the band and how it would look now. It fits your sleeve just fine. So, and for this case, I pulled the band, um, I undid the halfway fold and it's not really necessary. If you want to slip stitch though, you could, but I didn't include that in this video. I think I prepped for a slip stitch by folding it back over and pressing. Here I am pressing the band upwards, similar to step 32 in the instructions. So here I'm about to pin, and what I was doing is I was matching my notches from the band notch and my raw edges. So you could hand stitch this part right here if you wanted to, or you can go over it by your machine. I was probably prepping to do a slip stitch in that area, but you will see later on that I ended up opting out for the sleeves. But this is an example of how you could finish it if you really want sleeves and your fabric doesn't stretch enough. And like I've mentioned, if you do have a ribbing, you were supposed to just pin the band to the sleeve, do 2 stitches, and then trim your sleeve very close to the edge. And we will be pinning this sleeve to the garment in step 33 soon. So here's how the band would look and how the sleeve looks after you did it this way. It looks really cute, but I ended up opting out for the sleeves.
Okay, so since the sleeves didn't work out or aren't the way that I want them to do, I think. Oh, wait, I didn't say that in camera. Okay, so the sleeves, I think they're not designed for dogs. I say this because I'm noticing that the sleeve is at the shoulder, and if you have a dog, you know that the sleeve should be more right here on their chest. So I'm just gonna not include sleeves anymore. I will just end it with a kind of like a bias tape finish using the sleeves. That's what I'm going to do right now. So, and I'm thinking, I don't know actually. Sorry. I'm thinking if I should just leave a raw edge here too, but I'm not sure. I did check the instructions and it asks you to use bias tape, but I already have this sleeve. Why not just try to use the most I can? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold the sleeve inward this much all around. And I don't know, maybe I should make it smaller. actually, I think it's okay because I wanted to try to maybe cover its, what is that? What is elbow? I don't really know if that's a dog elbow, but I think it is. That's how I refer to it. So I wanted to at least cover that much. So I'm just gonna add the sleeve on the other side because I haven't done so. And then I will measure this too to make sure that it's even all around. But this is my plan on using this sleeve, or this is how I plan on finishing it then. The sleeve didn't work out for me. And then I might cut some of this and try to make it a nicer finish, but I'm not sure. I have to really just see.
To continue with step 33, or by just continuing with maybe reusing your sleeve like I will, you're going to turn the garment wrong side out. And you will keep your sleeve right side out like so. You're going to put it inside the garment and having your center seams matching and your notches. There is a right side to this, so make sure that your sleeve had the notch on one side and double notch on the other, and your front and back will have the same thing, so you'll have to match those up correctly. And then your marked dot on your sleeve has to go on the sleeve at the shoulder. Now to pin this in place, you're going to have to stretch your garment or stretch the sleeve, I think, or the garment, one of those two. You're going to do some stretching. So here I am aligning the circle. You're going to have to do some stretching to make this sleeve fit. So if you cut your fabric with the grain line and the arrow going the same direction, you should have enough stretch to do this part. I am using here a fleece, and I did have to stretch it a good amount, but I was able to fit the sleeve onto the garment without having to baste it. If you are having problems with your sleeve not being too big for the piece, you could do the same step that I just showed you, where you could baste between starting from one notch of part of the sleeve, going over along the dot and ending where the double notch is. You could baste that section, gather it, and then have it fit your garment. So I will leave this clip unedited just to show how long the process took me. Here, as you can see, I have the double notches. It's just like the neck. You have to pull it and make it fit the best. when you bring it over to stitch, make sure that you are stitching again at 1/2 inch seam allowance. This whole pattern called for that much of a seam allowance. And again, it's a little tricky because the piece is really small, and I tried to open up that bottom piece of my sewing machine to make it fit, but it's still too small. It does not fit. So maybe pin the other way, like I have my pins going towards the inside. You would probably pin your pins going on the outside. That would help you as well. And I would say maybe using definitely smaller pins as well. Maybe I just overpinned it too, but I found it necessary to pin this much to make it lay as flat as possible. You could try basting it first if you're not too sure, but if you think that it's going to be just fine, you can go ahead and stitch it. After stitching the sleeve onto the um, garment, I'm going to flip it over and iron it. So now I'm going to start pressing the sleeve to make it as flat as possible. And this is because I'm going to cut this sleeve to form um, like a bias tape. It's not necessarily a bias tape because it's not the shape of it, but I'm going to make it as if it were a bias tape finish. So after doing the other sleeve first, I learned or I found it easier to cut at an angle, which is why I'm kind of cutting here a triangle, because I did cut straight first and I had one side bigger than the other, and folding it down just made it a bit difficult. So here I'm measuring sorry, I'm measuring here to make sure that it's all the same length, and I said about 1 3/4 all around. When you cut, if you're gonna do this, make sure that to cut less. You could always cut more, but if you cut more, you can't undo it. So cut a little bit by a little bit. Okay, so after I cut, I flipped it over to fold the sleeve over the garment, and I spent some time doing this here. It took me a long time to really get what I wanted. I had to cut triangles out in some pieces to help it lay flatter. And again, if you're gonna cut triangles out in the raw edge, cut little by little, because I actually ended up cutting a lot more than needed, and I had to go over with my um, needle and thread to close that gap up. In this clip, I'm still folding over that little piece of sleeve, and I'm gonna pin all around it, making sure or trying my best that it's all the same size. And then I do this so I could baste it right at the edge, which I'll show in the next clip. Throughout this clip, you'll see that sometimes I just cannot get it to lay as flat as I need, and that's when I go in and snip the sleeve down a bit more. Or if it's like too rolled over, I also go in and snip it. So I will leave this clip at its full length, just as how I left most of the pieces from this part full length without editing that much, so you could see the process or how I ended up having to do this part. So here I'm going to baste at the edge. This is just to keep the part folded down so I could go in and slip stitch this. And I do end up taking this basted stitch off. So after stitching this piece, I do have this excess fabric and I left that on purpose what I'm doing is now I'm flipping that over and pinning it down, and I'm going to be slip stitching this part to the sleeve. And I didn't mention this earlier, but that is why I did leave a little bit of fabric instead of just stitching it very close. If you don't mind the raw edge, then you don't have to do this part. I did it because I'm nervous about the stitching being too close to the edge, and then the raw edge is gonna like fold over and you're gonna see it. I don't think flannel frays that much, but I didn't want that to happen, like the whole you're gonna be able to see it's gonna turn turn itself turn on itself, and the dog, and when the dog's wearing it you're gonna be able to see that. You could stitch kind of like what I did, but further away from the edge, the finished edge, and that way you could catch that seam a little bit further away so it won't roll over. Does that make sense? But I mean, I enjoyed slip stitching, so that's why I did this part. This clip I'm now slip stitching the folded edge over along the sleeve. If you put your needle through right above the seam you see there, it's gonna be no problem with respect to that little thread showing on the other side. So what you do here is you just pass your needle through the folded edge, and then you pass the needle right through on the edge that is actually sewed on. Once I finish slip stitching here, I did take off that seam we did earlier today, and it should hold itself pretty well. I don't think that slip stitching is any problem, there's a problem with slip stitching to finishing your garment.
¿Qué pasó? Vamos. Deja nada más me pongo un pantalón.
I think this part is mentioned on step 15 or step 17. I'm not too sure where you were supposed to stitch this neck piece, but I did end up repinning this neck part like we were supposed to in step 15. After doing the sleeves and all that, they just fell out, so I redid the pinning. I made sure that these pins on the outside were catching the neck piece on the inside. And the reason why I wanted to stitch like this instead of stitching the other way, where I could see if it's actually getting it, is because I would rather top stitch this than to have this side on the bobbin, and the bobbin side is usually messier than the top stitching spot. You could baste it like the other way to make sure you get that seam, and then top stitch and remove the basting stitches, but I just top stitched it right away. I was fairly confident with my 50 billion pins that you saw that I put on the neck piece. So in this clip, I'm showing that I went over this piece again because I did not like how it looked after trying to do a double fold. So I just went over it again, and I'm removing the original stitch that I did on step 16. And I do have another stitch all the way at the bottom. I don't know if you could see it, but I also removed that one because it had no purpose to it. The one that I did that's right beneath the stitch I'm removing was was enough. And I think it's far away enough for it to not have that issue that I was talking about with the sleeve, where like the raw edge is going to fold over and you're going to be able to see it.
This is the final result of the sweater. Off camera, I removed the bottom stitch here. This looks a little wonky, but I think it's okay for now, my first try. And this is how the chest looks. I took off also the basting stitch we did for the sleeves, and I did a slip stitch as I mentioned before instead. Let's see how I could show you on the inside. This is the neck finish I ended up with. I would have done a slip stitch similar to the neck, but the pattern only called for doing this, so what I might do is go with my machine. But at the same time, I kind of want to remove all of this excess. I've heard that flannel doesn't usually fray that much, but I would still just want to tidy this piece up a little bit more. And the parts of my sleeve where I kind of clipped more than I needed, I did go over it with my needle and thread. And I may also clean up the hems a little bit, or the raw edges on the zipper, so that it won't bother. The same with this, I did not want to leave this at a raw edge, so as you saw, I did stitch it a few times, and I did end up with raw edges in some places. Not so much for fraying, but I don't want the edge to be coming out, like unraveling, like undoing the, you know, like if it's too far out and then it starts to fold back. So this is the jacket.
I cut this garment out in a size medium because I used the measurements that my wiener dog would have been, and he passed away in February. So I made this garment in his spirit slash in his memory slash for him. Here is a clip of my dog modeling this jacket. It was not for his size. For his size, he should have been a large, but this is an example of how a medium would fit him. My poor dog has a torn ligament, so if you'd like to donate for his surgery, that would be greatly appreciated. But other than that, he's doing fine, and so he's a little bit on the chubby side, I think. So it still fit him, like the garment closed on him, but I think a bigger size like the large would fit him much more comfortably. But this is just an example of how the elastic came through to actually close on him. So hope this video was helpful for you, and if you have any suggestions for my next video, I welcome constructive criticism all the time. Thank you.